Before we start, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, can you please tell me from where and what time you're watching? Thanks.
It was a sweltering summer in the quiet town of Maplewood, nestled deep within the rolling hills of northern Oregon. Everyone knew everyone else in this small community. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still, and life moved at a leisurely pace. That summer, a peculiar ice cream truck appeared, its cheery jingle echoing through the streets. At first, no one thought much of it. Ice cream trucks were a rare but welcome sight, especially during those long, hot days. I was 11 that year, eager for the freedom summer promised. The truck would roll through our neighborhood in the afternoons, its music pulling kids from their yards and porches like a Pied Piper. It stopped at parks, lakes, and even outside the small library on Main Street. But something about the driver gave me pause. The first time I saw him, I was standing with my mom in our front yard. I just convinced her to give me some spare change for a treat. As I jogged toward the truck, I caught sight of the man inside. He was tall and wiry, his skin pale as if he avoided the sun. His eyes were hidden behind dark sunglasses, and his grin stretched just a little too wide. Something about him made my stomach twist. My mom always said to trust my gut, and she wasn't one to dismiss such feelings lightly. She was part of a long line of women who believed in intuition, and she passed that belief on to me. So, despite my craving for ice cream, I froze in my tracks and turned back. When I told her how I felt, she nodded seriously. "Good call," she said. "Stay away from him." Then one afternoon everything changed. 2 boys from our school went missing while playing at the park. Their moms swore they'd only looked away for a moment. But when they turned back, the boys were gone. The whole town searched for them. People combed through the woods, checked the creeks, and knocked on every door. The last thing anyone remembered seeing was the ice cream truck parked at the edge of the park. After that, it vanished. But then reports came in from the edge of town, near the rundown trailer park. The trailer park was the kind of place parents warned their kids about, a patch of rickety homes surrounded by thick woods. I'd only been there once, riding my bike with friends, and even in broad daylight, it felt ominous. The residents mostly kept to themselves, and the place had a reputation for trouble. When someone spotted the ice cream truck parked under a tarp near one of the trailers, the police swooped in. What they found inside the trailer is where the story splinters into local legend. Some say it was filled with keepsakes from children, toys, drawings, and even locks of hair. Others claim there were gruesome discoveries, evidence of the boys who went missing. Whatever the truth, the driver confessed. He admitted to luring the boys, taking them, and doing things so horrific they haunted the town for years. Their bodies were found days later at a landfill on the outskirts of Maplewood. After that summer, everything changed. Security cameras popped up at parks and public places. Neighborhood watch groups formed, and parents kept a closer eye on their kids. Years later, when I was older, I downloaded an app that showed where registered offenders lived. The dots on the map made my stomach churn. There were more in our small town than I ever imagined. To this day, I can't hear the jingle of an ice cream truck without my skin crawling. That summer left a scar on Maplewood, a reminder of how quickly innocence can be shattered. But for me, it was also a lesson. Sometimes your gut knows what your eyes can't see. When I was a kid, summers felt like endless days of sunshine and freedom. Our small town didn't have much. A single grocery store, a library, and a park with a rusty slide and creaky swings. But to me, it was paradise. My mom, ever patient and kind, made it a habit to take me and my 2 best friends, Kelly and Ava, to that park almost every day. It was our haven, where laughter bounced off the trees and everything felt safe. One of the best parts about those days was the ice cream truck. The sound of its cheerful jingle was enough to send us sprinting across the grass, coins clenched tightly in our little hands. Most days it was the same truck, its driver a friendly man named Mr. Benny, who always had a smile and a joke for us. But one day, a different truck rolled into town. It was older, its paint peeling and the jingle slightly distorted, like a lullaby played on an out-of-tune piano. We didn't care. Ice cream was ice cream, and we were kids. Kelly, Ava, and I raced to the truck, laughing as we stumbled over each other. The driver leaned out of the window, grinning. His smile was too wide, his teeth slightly yellowed. He wore a faded cap that shadowed his eyes, but I could feel them on us, sharp and piercing. "You kids are in for a treat today," he said, his voice rough like gravel. "I've got something special, just for you." He exchanged uncertain glances, but his words intrigued us. "What is it?" Kelly asked, bouncing on her toes. "Oh, you'll see," he said with a chuckle. He took our coins and disappeared into the truck. The minutes stretched on as we waited, the sound of muffled movement and faint giggles drifting out of the window. Ava shuffled her feet, glancing back toward the park where our moms were chatting. "This is weird," she whispered. Before I could respond, the man reappeared holding 3 sundaes in clear plastic cups. "Here you go," he said, his grin even wider. "Made these just for you. Enjoy every bite." We thanked him, though the way he was watching us made my stomach churn. As we walked back to our moms, I noticed something strange. The truck didn't linger like they usually did, waiting to serve the next round of kids. Instead, it sped off, the jingle fading into the distance. The sundaes looked normal enough, vanilla swirled with chocolate syrup and a cherry on top. But when I took a bite, I froze. It tasted wrong. Bitter and salty, with a faint aftertaste I couldn't place. Ava and Kelly made faces too, poking at their cups with their spoons. "This doesn't taste right," Kelly said, wrinkling her nose. Ava nodded, pushing hers away. "I don't think we should eat it." My mom must have noticed us hesitating because she called out, "What's wrong, kids?" I hesitated, but eventually walked over and handed her my cup. She took one taste, and her face darkened. I'd never seen her look so angry or scared. "Come on," she said, her voice tight. "We're leaving." She marched us to the car, not even bothering to gather our things from the picnic table. We protested, but she wouldn't explain. Only later, when I was older, did she tell me what she'd realized. The ice cream had been tampered with in the most horrifying way imaginable. She called the police that same evening. Officers came to our house to take statements, but none of us could describe the driver well. He'd kept his face partially hidden, and the distorted music from the truck had distracted us. They took the remaining ice cream for testing, though I never found out the results. The man and his truck vanished after that day, leaving behind nothing but a lingering sense of unease. I learned later that similar incidents had been reported in nearby towns. Children, their innocence betrayed by a man hiding behind a smile. Even now, years later, the memory makes my skin crawl. The park isn't the same for me anymore, and ice cream trucks don't bring the joy they used to. To this day, I can't eat a sundae without feeling a knot in my stomach. To the man who turned a piece of my childhood into a nightmare, let's not meet again. The summer I turned 11 was one of the hottest I could remember. The air felt thick, and the heat clung to everything like a heavy blanket. That day, my mom was working late, and my dad was out of town for some conference. I was spending the day with my neighbors, Lily and her older sister Amber. Amber was 13, practically an adult in our eyes, and she had been put in charge of keeping us out of trouble. We had been lounging in their backyard, sprawled out on an old trampoline, tossing ideas back and forth about what to do. It was one of those lazy suburban afternoons where time seemed to stretch endlessly. That's when we heard it, the unmistakable jingle of the ice cream truck. It was faint at first, but the sound grew louder, closer, more exciting. Amber grabbed some cash from the kitchen and led us out. We darted down the street, joining a small group of kids who had already gathered near the curb. As the truck rolled to a stop, I caught my first glimpse of the driver. Something about him made my stomach tighten. He had this peculiar smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and there was a long, jagged scar running down the side of his face. His gaze swept over us like he was trying to memorize every detail. "Come on, hurry up," Amber said, nudging me forward. We ordered quickly, popsicles and a few packs of bubble gum, and Amber made sure we stayed together as we walked back. But instead of heading straight to their house, she motioned for us to sit on a neighbor's driveway. "Why can't we just go home?" Lily whined, licking at her popsicle. Amber's voice dropped low. "I've heard stories about guys like him. It's safer to wait until he's gone." I wanted to roll my eyes. Amber loved scary stories and was always trying to spook us, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest. From the corner of my eye, I saw the ice cream truck creeping through the cul-de-sac, its engine rumbling softly. The driver was looking at us again. He smiled. No, smirked, and then winked before finally turning the corner and disappearing out of sight. We didn't wait around. Amber grabbed Lily and me by the arms and we sprinted back to their house. Once inside, she locked the door and dragged us upstairs to their parents' room. The big window overlooked the street, and Amber had stationed us there like we were on some kind of stakeout. For a while, nothing happened. The hum of daytime TV in the background and the sugary aftertaste of my popsicle almost made me forget about the driver's creepy grin. But then Lily gasped, pointing out the window. The ice cream truck had returned. This time, it was parked across the street in front of the empty house where the Days used to live. The driver got out, carrying a small notepad. He walked slowly up to the door, inspecting it like he was a realtor or something. Then he started writing. "What's he doing?" I whispered, my voice shaky. Amber's face was pale. "He's writing down the address," she hissed. We ducked out of sight when he looked up, but my heart was racing. Peeking through the side window, I saw him climb back into the truck. Instead of driving away, he turned it around and stopped right in front of Amber's house. He jotted something else down, then lingered for what felt like forever before finally driving off. When Mrs. Harper, our neighbor who worked at the police station, pulled into her driveway a few minutes later, we bolted outside to tell her everything. She listened carefully, her face growing darker with each detail. She made a quick call, and within an hour, police officers were canvassing the neighborhood. They caught him later that night. The notepad he carried had detailed descriptions of us, along with the addresses of Amber's house and the Days' house. He had even scribbled notes about the best times to come back. Turns out he was a registered sex offender with an outstanding warrant. For weeks after that, every time I heard the faint jingle of an ice cream truck, my stomach churned. What should have been a harmless childhood memory was now tainted by that scarred face and sinister smile. Even now, years later, the sound still makes me uneasy. The morning it happened still lives in the back of my mind, like a flickering old film that won't let me forget. Even now, years later, I can hear the sounds, the jingle, the scream, clear as if it were yesterday. My cousin Sam and I were thick as thieves growing up. He was older, bigger, the kind of guy who seemed like nothing could shake him. I was the scrawny fourth grader who trailed him everywhere, idolizing his confidence. We lived in a sleepy little town, surrounded by endless woods, the kind of place where you could walk for miles and see nothing but trees and shadows. That morning was like any other, or at least it started that way. It was barely light out, the sky a dull gray with the sun just beginning to rise. Sam and I trudged to the bus stop at the edge of our road, our footsteps crunching softly on the gravel. He was in high school, and mornings weren't his thing, so we didn't talk much. I remember yawning so hard my jaw ached as we stood there, the woods around us still and quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves. Then we heard it. It started faint, almost like it was coming from far away. A tune every kid knows, cheerful and sweet, carrying a promise of summer treats. Pop Goes the Weasel. Sam froze, and so did I. "Is that?" I started to say, but Sam shook his head. There was no ice cream truck in our town. There never had been. The nearest city was a solid 40-minute drive, and even there you'd be hard-pressed to find one. But the jingle got louder, clearer, weaving its way through the trees like it was hunting for us. My heart began to race. Sam put a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. "Stay close," he muttered. I glanced around, searching for a glimpse of bright colors or the telltale shape of a truck. But there was nothing, just trees stretching endlessly in every direction. Then, cutting through the cheerful tune like a knife, came a scream. "Help me! Somebody please help!" It was a woman's voice, shrill and desperate, echoing through the woods. I felt my stomach twist into knots. The scream came again, louder this time. "Help! They're killing me!" I looked up at Sam, my voice trembling. "What do we do?" Sam's face was pale, but his jaw was set. "We wait for the bus," he said firmly. His eyes never left the woods. The jingle played on, cheerful and relentless, and I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. It felt wrong, all of it. The music, the scream, the fact that there wasn't a road anywhere near here for a truck to drive on. And yet the sound was so close now, as if it could burst through the trees at any second. "Pop goes the weasel," the tune sang, almost mocking us. Then the bus came. Its headlights cut through the early morning haze, and the familiar hiss of its brakes was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. The doors opened, but Sam didn't move right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the woods, scanning for something I couldn't see. "Get on," he said finally, his voice low and urgent. I scrambled up the steps and Sam followed, sitting next to me. As the bus started to pull away, I turned to look out the window. For a moment I thought I saw something, a flash of white deep in the trees like the edge of a dress. But it was gone before I could be sure. The music stopped. The woods were silent again, as if nothing had ever happened. We didn't talk about it on the ride to school. Sam just sat there, his jaw tight, staring straight ahead. I wanted to ask if he saw it too, if he heard the scream the way I had, but the words wouldn't come out. Years later I brought it up to him. We were sitting on his porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, and I asked him if he remembered that morning. He didn't even hesitate. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I remember." "What do you think it was?" I asked. He shook his head, his expression unreadable. "I don't know, and I don't want to. I never pressed him after that. But even now, every time I hear that jingle, my stomach tightens and I can't help but glance over my shoulder. Because some part of me knows that whatever was out there that morning, it wasn't selling ice cream." When I was a kid, I lived on this weird crescent-shaped street that looped around a small playground. It wasn't much, just a patch of scraggly grass with a couple of rusty swings. But it was where we spent most of our time. My house was on one side of the loop, and my best friend Sam lived on the other. I was 10 when we met, and he was 9, so naturally we were inseparable. Our families were close too, which meant lots of shared holidays and late-night parties. On nights like New Year's or some random weekend celebration, the adults would get wrapped up in their own world, leaving us kids to roam free. It was usually me, my younger brother Max Sam, and his little sister Ava. We'd sneak out to the playground, climb rooftops, or play hide-and-seek in the shadows. Ava, being the youngest, would sometimes chicken out, leaving the three of us to explore. One night, during one of those wild parent parties, we decided to go to the park. It was past midnight, and the air had that chilly electric feel that made everything seem more exciting. Ava didn't want to come, so it was just me, Max, and Sam. I was 14 by then, the oldest, which somehow made me the responsible one. We made it to the swings and started daring each other to go higher when this van crept into view. Its headlights were off, and it moved so slowly it was almost like it was sneaking. It was too dark to tell what color it was, but something about it made my stomach twist. Sam whispered, "Get down," and we all hit the dirt, lying flat on the cold ground. "Why are we hiding?" I hissed, feeling the dampness seep through my clothes. "Because you're a girl," Sam shot back. I glared at him, ready to argue, but Max shushed us both. The van had disappeared. We scrambled to different spots, trying to figure out where it went. Then we saw it, parked at the cul-de-sac on the far side of the park. For a moment, none of us breathed. The van sat there, its engine humming softly. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might give us away. After what felt like forever, the van started moving again, creeping around the loop and eventually disappearing into the night. A few days later, the winter holidays began, and I started staying up late, partly because I thought it was cool, and partly because I couldn't stop thinking about the van. Sam and I would Skype every night, talking until one of us dozed off. Both our bedrooms were at the front of our houses so we could see each other's lights and wave if we wanted. One night, around 1 a.m., I heard a car. I peered out my window expecting it to be one of our neighbors, but there it was, the van. The same van, moving as slowly as before, its headlights still off. My heart sank. I told Sam, who immediately looked out his window. Together we watched it make its rounds, stopping at the same cul-de-sac before vanishing. This became a nightly ritual. For 2 weeks straight, the van appeared, always between 1 and 2 a.m. I even recorded it once to show my parents, but they waved it off, saying I was being paranoid. Then, one weekend I stayed over at Sam's house while my parents were out of town. It was late, and the three of us, me, Sam, and Ava, were playing video games in his room. That's when we heard it again, the low, unmistakable hum of the van. Sam's parents were still awake, so we bolted to the living room and told his dad. His dad, a big guy with a temper to match, grabbed a metal bat and stomped to the front door. "Stay inside," he growled, throwing it open. We watched as he stood there, waiting. Sure enough, the van crept into view and stopped at the cul-de-sac. That's when his dad exploded. "Hey, you!" he shouted, storming barefoot into the street. "Get the hell out of here!" He swung the bat, hitting the back of the van with a loud clang. The driver sped off, tires screeching, but not before we caught the license plate. We reported it to the cops, who took it seriously, thank God. A few days later, the story hit the local news. Turns out the van belonged to a man who was supposed to deliver ice cream in the summer. But there was more. He'd been lurking around neighborhoods, watching kids and God knows what else. When they caught him, the guy didn't even try to deny it. The creepiest part? He had an eye patch and this weird, toothless grin that would have made anyone uneasy. Looking back, it still makes my skin crawl. I don't eat ice cream from trucks anymore, and I never will.